All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to totally demystify the invisible social mechanics that dictate how we form, function, and, well, sometimes completely fail in groups. Think about it for a second. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, your behavior is being subtly guided and sometimes completely controlled by the unwritten rules of the groups you belong to. We are constantly surrounded by others, but what actually transforms a random collection of people into a unified, powerful force?
Here's our roadmap. We'll be hitting 5 key areas today. First, decoding the human group. Second, why we join. Third, the life cycle of a group. Fourth, the invisible architecture. And finally, number 5, the danger of groupthink.
So let's kick things off with part 1, decoding the human group. Basically, what makes us more than just a crowd? To really wrap our heads around this, picture the sheer chaos of a massive crowd at a stadium. You've got thousands of people yelling, moving, completely disjointed. Now, look at the sports team actually playing on the field. That team, they represent a structured, interactive group. They're running precise plays, constantly communicating, and actively sharing a single goal. The audience behind them, though, even if they're cheering for the exact same team, they're really just a passive collection of individuals who simply happen to be in the exact same place at the exact same time.
The absolutely crucial psychological point here is that true groups require mutual interdependence. What does that mean? It basically means that what one person does directly impacts the others. Have you ever been stuck on a group project where one person completely slacked off? You literally felt the pain of their inaction, right? That shared suffering or shared victory is interdependence in action. If a fielder in a cricket match drops a vital catch, the whole team suffers the consequences. A real group is an organized system held together by shared motives and very specific expectations.
Now, there's a vital difference between a standard group and a team. In a regular group, a leader usually shoulders to heavy lifting, and the final output is really just the sum of the individual parts. But a team, that's a whole different ballgame. Coordinated positive synergy and shared responsibility take center stage. Think of a high-performing pit crew in Formula One. They don't just do their own isolated jobs. They have highly complementary skills, they're anticipating each other's moves in milliseconds, and they hold themselves mutually accountable. It's a highly collaborative, hyper-specialized form of a group.
Moving right along to Section 2, Why We Join, the psychological gravity of groups.
You've got to ask yourself, why are we so biologically and psychologically driven to seek out these structures? Why not just go it alone? Well, the reality is, we join groups to satisfy a massive variety of complex human needs. Take joining a local running club, for example. At first, maybe you join just for physical safety, running in numbers when it's dark outside. That's security. But soon, putting on the club's jersey gives you a sense of prestige. That's status. Beating your personal best alongside peers boosts your self-esteem, and by training together, you share knowledge to achieve goals that would feel absolutely impossible if you were just grinding out miles all by yourself.
Beyond those deeply internal needs, we're also organically pushed together by surprisingly simple external factors, mainly proximity and similarity. Honestly, think about how often people become work besties simply because they happen to be assigned the desk right next to each other at a new job. Proximity gives us the chance to interact, but similarity is what really makes it stick. When you meet someone who shares your exact views, like maybe you both fiercely hated the ending of that one incredibly popular fantasy TV show, it instantly reinforces that you are right. That psychological validation paves the way for liking someone and ultimately forming a group with them.
Which brings us to Section 3, the life cycle of a group, from strangers to a cohesive unit. Groups don't just magically snap into perfection the second people meet. It's a dynamic, evolutionary process. Using Bruce Tuckman's famous developmental model, we can map this out like a staircase. Imagine joining a brand new startup. You start with forming, where everyone's super polite, kind of uncertain, just feeling each other out. Then comes storming. This is a period of conflict over roles and control. And here's the crazy part. Storming is completely healthy and necessary. You have to weather that conflict to settle the hierarchy. Once that's sorted, you reach norming, where a positive identity solidifies, allowing the group to finally shift into performing their actual goals. And for temporary groups, there's a final adjourning phase when the job is totally done.
Okay, moving on to Section 4, the invisible architecture. The structural elements of our social lives.
Once a group is actually formed and stabilized, it develops this highly specific, invisible internal architecture that brings predictability to how everyone interacts. The absolute foundation of this is your role. Think about your own life. When you step into your role as a student, or a sibling, or a manager, your behavior instinctively shifts to meet the socially defined expectations of that specific position. But This can also lead to what psychologists call role conflict. Imagine having to be a strict boss at work to someone who also happens to be your best friend on the weekends. Navigating those clashing expectations, yeah, that's a huge part of group dynamics.
Next up, we have norms. These act as the group's unspoken rules, strictly specifying what's expected from everyone. You can kind of think of norms as the cultural DNA of the group. They're the agreed-upon standards that keep total chaos at bay, without needing an actual written rulebook. Want to know just how powerful norms are? Imagine walking into a crowded elevator, standing totally still but facing the back wall instead of the doors. There is absolutely no written law against doing that, but the intense, awkward physical discomfort everyone in that elevator feels, that right there is the invisible power of a norm being broken.
Within this architecture, we're also constantly navigating status, a subtle hierarchy of prestige and power. And ascribed status might just come from being the eldest child in a family, or the founder of a company. But achieved status, that's earned through your specific expertise and hard work. And this can shift dynamically. The quietest person in a crowded conference room can suddenly gain the absolute highest status in the group if the company's servers go down and they're the only person who knows how to fix the bug. Suddenly, everyone defers to them. Finally, cohesiveness acts as the psychological glue holding all these roles and norms together. It transforms isolated individuals into a unified social force. When cohesiveness is high, you get this incredibly powerful we feeling. Members strongly desire to remain in the group, and they start thinking and acting as a single unified entity. It feels amazing to be part of a highly cohesive team. But wait, is it actually possible for a group to be too unified? What happens when that comfortable we feeling goes way too far?
And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, the danger of groupthink, when cohesiveness becomes catastrophic.
So, extreme cohesiveness isn't always a good thing. In fact, when the desperate desire to stick together outweighs the desire to actually be right, things can go terribly, terribly wrong. Psychologist Irving Janis identified this terrifying phenomenon, famously calling it groupthink. This is where the overwhelming concern for absolute unanimity causes members to make completely irrational, uncritical decisions. In highly cohesive, isolated groups, the appearance of consensus is prized above literally everything else. No one dares to express a dissenting opinion or point out obvious flaws because they fear undermining the group's precious unity. As a result, the group becomes dangerously out of touch with reality.
History gives us a stark look at the consequences of groupthink on a massive scale. Looking at the source text's key historical example, we see the devastating outcomes of the Vietnam War. Between 1964 and 1967, cohesive leadership circles continuously minimized external warnings and prioritized internal consensus over stark reality. Decisions were repeatedly made based on an insulated, miscalculated belief in their own power to control events. The historical result of ignoring dissent within those rooms was a staggering, immeasurable loss of human life on all sides of the conflict.
So how do we stop this dangerous detachment from reality? Groups have to intentionally build mechanisms to counteract groupthink. Leaders must foster an environment where critical thinking isn't just allowed, it's actively rewarded. You have to invite outside experts to break the echo chamber and rigorously consider alternative plans. Think about your own workplace or committee meetings. How often do you actively play devil's advocate? Being the person brave enough to disrupt the consensus and ask the hard questions is a vital, totally necessary safeguard for any high-stakes decision. Wrapping up this explainer on the immense power of social influence, I want to leave you with a critical thought to take into your everyday life. Look closely at the invisible architecture of your own world. Are the teams, the committees, and the social circles you belong to prioritizing healthy debate? Or are they falling into the comfortable, yet highly perilous, trap of just demanding unanimous agreement? Understanding these social mechanics is your very first step to becoming a more effective and resilient group member.